So let's look now at a bit of history. So we're traveling from Ethiopia to Arabia and the world. We're going to have a bonus exercise number 2 as well in this section, but specifically we're focusing on coffee origins. So where did coffee come from? You may have heard a tale about Kaldi and his dancing goats. And it's a pretty mythical tale. It's pretty exciting to share. There are some people who have other variants, but most commonly, the story for the discovery of Arabica coffee goes something like an Ethiopian goat herder was out in the hillsides, 600, 700 AD, and he was watching his goats, or rather his goats ran off and did what goats do. They eat. And so as the goats came back, they were excited, they were jumping, they were dancing, they didn't sleep well that night. And then in the next morning, the goats ran off to that same location. So Kaldi, the goat herder, followed them. And he discovered that they were eating this new shrub, this new fruit from a tree that they seemed to be very excited about. And so he tried some. He tried the leaves, he tried the fruit. Later, somehow, someone threw it into a fire and found that they could roast the coffee as well. So this was the discovery of the Arabica coffee species. Arabica coffee is native to Ethiopia, and you may see on a coffee bag somewhere, Ethiopia heirloom. And that's just signifying that it's part of the original Arabica species. From Ethiopia, that 600, 700 AD, coffee just naturally spread through animals, through the seed as it transferred, as it moved, slow spreading naturally. But eventually people did take it next to Arabia. And so around 1000 AD, so, fast forward 300 years, the coffee is growing in Yemen and the Arabian Peninsula. And so some of the world's most fine and rare coffees that are hard to get a hold of, but they're fantastic, are from Yemen, Yemenese coffee. And it also has a very ancient root stock. Then Arabica traveled to India, and India grows a lot of Arabica coffee as well as Robusta coffee. And something around 1200 AD, and then, I don't have to say AD, we're already there, but then from India, British traders, the East Indies Company, they took it to Bourbon and some of the French settlements, and it went to the Caribbean, it went to Indonesia and the islands, and eventually coffee started to spread all over the world. So the main and fastest, largest jumps of the spread for the coffee species was through human cultivation, so planting in new places. And cultivars are like this next level up in the coffee tree from varieties, and then we move into various cultivars, because that was produced through crossbreeding, through hybrid, through specialized plants that could grow in various regions. And perhaps when the climate changes, because you move into Guatemala, which was very different than the Caribbean islands, which was very different than the Indonesian islands. Each of these locations, with their soil, with their climate, the plants had to adapt. Some of the plants would die, some would live, or they would change. So this is the way that coffee spread around the world, and naturally then, through natural selection and evolution, and then also through intentional human cultivation, we got new coffee species. So it makes for fun coffee drinking today. Now, the challenge is you can't just take coffee and plant it all over the world. You can't plant it up in Canada. You can't plant it down in southern Argentina. It's just not going to grow in certain places because the winters will be too cold. The elevation is not sufficient. The daytime temperatures or the nighttime temperatures are also not conducive. Just like you can't grow bananas or pineapples or mango anywhere in the world that you want, coffee is a little particular about the soil and the climate that you put it in. So if you look at the world, it's not perfect, but between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, you will find that there is something we call the coffee belt. and it's a little further south actually than just the tropics. But the coffee belt is where you find the majority of coffee easily growing. And so most of the ideal conditions, they center, so many degrees above and below the equator. Now you can't just plant it in the hot Saharan desert just because it's within that coffee belt. It doesn't have the rainfall or the cool night temperatures. The coffee plant will not be happy in the Saharan desert, even though it is inside of that coffee belt. So when you look at the image here in the lecture and when you look elsewhere, you'll notice that sometimes coffees grow like in Mexico, in Yunnan, China. They grow north of this area, or they'll even grow south of this area in certain countries in Latin America and elsewhere. So it's not a restrictive line, but it is a general category where you find most of the world's coffee growing. And that includes Robusta. Now, Robusta was not native to Ethiopia, but it was native to Africa. Africa is a big, beautiful, diverse nation, a continent full of nations and climates. So the Robusta species was first discovered and is indigenous to Congo, or the Democratic Republic of Congo. So very close to Ethiopia, but in different growing conditions, the Robusta plant was also first discovered. And naturally, it evolved and its species spread. So that's a little about how coffee has come to us and traveled through time, let's say. It's evolved and changed through time. So another important factor of this course is how coffee travels today. And a big part of that is trade. Coffee is one of the highest traded commodities in terms of volume and frequency. It has to go so many steps through the coffee supply chain to go from a mountainside cooperative farm to the processing mill to storage to the shipping to a coffee clearing warehouse in the receiving nation, and then eventually to roasters and consumers. It changes hands so many times. We're going to talk about later, and some of the courses go much more into that in terms of quality control. Each of these steps just adds a layer of complexity that each of these steps, something could be compromised in terms of the coffee quality, freshness, or potentially any problems that arise because it changes hands so many times. But Arabica and Robusta, those were the big focuses. So let's look at first total production. Which nation in the world inside of that coffee belt, coffee growing nation, grows more coffee than anyone else? Anybody know? Total volume output. This is Arabica plus Robusta combined. That's Brazil. Brazil grows more of the world's coffee than any other nation. When you just add up all of the farms and all of the harvest, Brazil is the world's number one producer. Now, who grows more Arabica coffee than anyone in the world? Play the Jeopardy music. Again, Brazil. Brazil grows more Arabica than anyone else in the world. Now, there's a top 10, and so you'll find lots of other countries that are ranking up at the top there in terms of Arabica. Colombia, Indonesia, Ethiopia, Honduras, India, Uganda. Lots of nations that have great growing capacity and just a legacy for producing large amounts of Arabica. But Brazil is number one for Arabica, number one for total output. And then Robusta, the number one nation for growing Robusta in the world is Vietnam. Vietnamese coffee, if you've ever had it, is super bitter, super intense, and that's because it's made from Robusta. And the number one nation for Robusta production in the world is Vietnam. Now, some of these things may change or fluctuate each year, but all Arabica coffees must be cleared through the New York Stock Exchange. The commodity price is set through New York, and all Robusta coffees are cleared through the London Stock Exchange. And the price is set there. So as these coffees travel the world, they come in giant burlap sacks like this, anywhere from 50 to 100 to 150 pounds, or 30, 60, 70 kg, however you